Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to tackle one of the biggest questions in all of American history. What really caused the Civil War? Well, the answer is a lot more complicated than you might think, and it all kicks off with the nation's big optimistic dream of pushing west.
Okay, let's get right into it. The story of 19th century America is really a story of growth, right? A nation just stretching and stretching all the way from one ocean to the other. But here's the thing. That very dream of expansion had a kind of poison pill hidden inside it. Every single new square mile of land forced a question that the country just couldn't answer without tearing itself apart. Was this new land going to be free, or was it going to be slave?
You've got to picture this. In the mid-1800s, America was just completely gripped by this idea called manifest destiny. And this wasn't just some dry government policy. It was a powerful, almost religious belief. It was fueled by a huge population boom and this incredible thirst for new land. A lot of Americans honestly believed their nation was chosen by God to control the whole continent. It felt like an unstoppable force of nature. But here's the problem. This big, grand dream meant two totally different things to the North and the South. For people in the North, the West was a land of opportunity, a place for free farmers and workers to make a new life. But for the South, the West was absolutely essential for the survival and, importantly, the expansion of their entire economy, which was built on slavery. So you can see how every new piece of land immediately became a political battleground, a fight for the very soul of the country's future. And here's why the stakes were just so incredibly high politically. It all came down to the Senate. See, every new state gets 2 senators. So if you admit a new state as free, that tips the balance of power in Congress towards the North. If you admit it as slave, well, that strengthens the South. It was a complete zero-sum game, a political contest that neither side felt they could possibly afford to lose. And the whole time, the mistrust between them was just growing and growing. So after the U.S. got all this new land from the Mexican-American War, these tensions just boiled over. The country was, and I'm not exaggerating, on the brink of total collapse. This led to a desperate last-ditch attempt to create a legislative fix, anything to hold the nation together.
And what they came up with was the Compromise of 1850. It was this really complex package deal, a political balancing act, trying to give something to both sides. So the North got California admitted as a free state. The South got this idea of popular sovereignty, which basically just meant letting the white settlers in the new territories vote on slavery for themselves. And, crucially, they got a much, much stricter Fugitive Slave Act.
But oh man, one part of this deal, that Fugitive Slave Act, it backfired spectacularly. See, this law didn't just apply to the South. It actually forced government officials and even regular citizens in the North to help capture escaped slaves. So instead of calming things down, it brought the brutal reality of slavery right onto their doorsteps, and that sparked absolute outrage and massive resistance. So what's the big takeaway here? This so-called solution was really just a band-aid, a temporary truce. It didn't solve the real problem at all. It just kicked the can down the road. In fact, you could argue it made things worse. By forcing the issue into the daily lives of Northerners, it just deepened the anger and pushed the North and South even further apart. Okay, so that fragile peace, yeah, it was never going to last. It completely shattered in the 1850s. If the Compromise of 1850 was a crack in the foundation of the country, the next 10 years, well, that was the earthquake that brought the whole house down. The 1850s were just one shock after another. First, you get the Kansas-Nebraska Act in '54, which just ripped up older compromises and threw the whole West open to slavery again. That led directly to Bleeding Kansas, which was basically a small, brutal civil war out on the prairie. And then came the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, a total bombshell that said Congress had no power to stop slavery's expansion anywhere. For the North, this was terrifying. All this chaos just blew up the old political system. The national parties that used to be able to make deals, like the Whigs, they just fell apart under the pressure. The middle ground completely vanished. Being a moderate was basically impossible. And out of all that chaos rose the Republican Party in the North, a brand new party built on one single confrontational idea: stop the expansion of slavery, period. Then, in 1858, a Senate race in Illinois between 2 politicians ended up perfectly framing this huge, now irreconcilable debate for the entire country. Their arguments just laid bare the giant canyon that had opened up between the North and the South. And this just shows you everything. On one side, you had Stephen Douglas, the Democrat.
He clung to the idea of process, popular sovereignty. He basically said, hey, let's not get into the morality, just let the local voters decide. But on the other side, you had Abraham Lincoln, the Republican. And he forced the moral question. He said, no, slavery is a profound wrong, and this nation cannot survive permanently divided against itself. And all of this leads us right to the breaking point, the presidential election of 1860. Now, this election wasn't the single cause of the war, but it was the final inevitable result of this decade of crisis. It was the spark that finally lit the fuse. And just look at the results. This chart tells the whole story. Abraham Lincoln won the presidency with 180 electoral votes, every single one of them from the free states in the North. He got exactly 0 electoral votes from the South. In fact, his name wasn't even on the ballot in 10 Southern states. So if you're a Southern leader at that moment, what do you see? You see a president elected who doesn't represent you at all, who you see as a direct threat to your entire way of life. For them, the writing was on the wall. They believed they had lost all their political power in the Union. There was no more room for compromise, and the only option they felt they had left was to leave. Secession began just weeks after the election. So when you step back, you can see this clear, tragic chain of events, like dominoes falling. The nation's dream of westward expansion kept forcing this impossible question about slavery. That created a zero-sum political fight. The compromises they tried only made things worse, and eventually the whole political system just collapsed, making the election of 1860 the absolute point of no return. Which leaves us with one of history's biggest, most haunting questions. When you look at it all laid out like that, it can really feel like a tragic march to a predetermined ending. But was it? Was the Civil War truly inevitable? Could anything or anyone have stopped it? You know what? Historians still argue about this. Some, like James McPherson and Eric Foner, say yes, the conflict between a free labor North and a slave labor South was so fundamental that war was pretty much unavoidable. But others, like Avery Craven and David Potter, say no, it was a catastrophic failure of politics, that a generation of leaders failed to find a way out. It's a powerful reminder that the past is never really settled, and it's always worth asking how a nation's greatest dream could lead to its greatest tragedy.